Alright guys, welcome to the next part of building the BrightSky weather app. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last video. We went ahead and set up a bunch of stuff on the settings screen. In addition to, we're hitting an error when fetching the weather from weather kits here in our project. So we'll debug this together. I realized what I missed, and then we will continue and probably jump into setting up some of the UI with the weather data that we are now fetching. So hit that like button and let's continue and trudge forward. So the reason that we were getting an error here in Xcode originally was because here in the developer portal, we needed to check WeatherKit under the capabilities tab. But the other thing that we also did need to go ahead and check was WeatherKit under services. So we're obviously using WeatherKit the capability, but WeatherKit also has a service associated with it that you can also access via REST API, but we do need to also check the box here, make sure you save and refresh the page here in the developer portal to make sure your change is taken. And once you go ahead and have done that, if we give our project a build and run, what you'll notice is we're now able to successfully see our current hourly and daily weather. The other thing I went and did kind of off video was if we go to our scheme here and we hit edit scheme, under the Run tab and Options, we can actually specify a location that our default location will take in our simulator. So it was using Apple, but I'm actually on the East Coast here in the US, so New York is more my speed for, kind of local weather. So I just set it as that. It's not really relevant to why it wasn't working, but I figured I'd call it out since you can use that setting to go and use your local location for this project. So cool. Now that we're getting some weather data, what we want to actually do is twofold. One, we want to convert the data into view models that our view can take in. And two, we need to build out this view because that's pretty important in a weather application if I don't say so myself. So let's get into doing both of those things. The third thing I'll call out is we also haven't handled, tapping on any of these cells and settings. So these are the three major things that we have to do. So maybe we'll start with settings since it's a little more contained and I would say simple. Alrighty, so we're in our settings view where our table view resides, and essentially we have this delegate function where we get a call whenever we tap on a cell. So I'm going to say handle tap, and the traditional way and a common convention of doing this is by using a delegate. So I can say something like settings view delegate, which is a protocol that I'll create, and I'll once again use the name of this view, which is common convention. So we'll say settings view, passing in an instance of setting view. And here I'll go ahead and say did tap, and I'll say did tap option will be a setting option. So we're essentially going to call this delegate function, and whoever the delegate is responsible for handling that function call. So we'll create an instance member and we'll toss in delegate here. It's saying that, let's see, what's the problem here? It's saying that we can't apply week. We need this to be class bound. So we'll make this protocol class bound to any object, and that error goes away. And here in this handle tap section, we can say delegate, and we're just going to call that function passing self. And we want to know what option was selected. So we're going to unwrap that from the settings view model right here. So we'll say guard let view model else return. So we now know we have the view model, and the way we get this option is by doing the following. We'll say view model dot options, and we have an index path parameter coming into this function. So we'll just index it with random access using index path.row, which is also what we have done here in our cell DQ code right above. So that'll basically expose this view interaction, and back in our settings controller, what we can actually do is we can say primary view dot delegate will be self, and now we're going to get yelled at because we aren't conforming to that delegate. So I will actually do it in a extension here to keep things nice and organized. And if we just do a command B to build our project after bringing that in, we should be good to go. All right, cool. So how will we actually handle, what option we selected? Well, it's pretty simple. We can actually just switch on option here. And let's see, autocomplete should do its job if I spell it correctly. Here we are. And inside of each of these, we want to handle something. So for now, since we don't want to get into the weeds of all of this too quickly, we'll just break in all of these. And that's basically how we know that we can handle these cell tabs. So I'll just print out a handling ... just to validate. If I come into the simulator and tap on one of these, we should get that handling, which in fact we do here at the bottom. So good deal. We got that working. Let's start talking about some of this weather data, because that's kind of the meat of what we got going on in this project. So we have our weather manager here. We're calling this completion handler whenever this kind of fetch weather API is invoked, but we're not retaining any of these models. We're kind of just printing them out, which is not really that helpful. So let's see if we can retain them. So current weather is a model of type current weather. Hourly weather is forecast, which looks to be some sort of generic object that has a hourly weather off of it. And if we click on this, we can see that we get a forecast off of this, which is an array of hour weather. And if I'm not mistaken, we have a similar type of thing going on over here where this has a forecast off of it, which is an array of day weather. Both of these use a generic under the hood, which is kind of irrelevant to us. What we more importantly care about is the following. So what we want to do is retain these models to be used. So what I'll do here is I'll say public var current weather is going to be of type current weather, like so, optional. And I'm also going to say this is private set. So essentially only things in this class can write to this, but anybody can read from it, hence it's public. And we'll copy and paste this, and here I'll do hourly weather and daily weather, like so. And this is going to be an array of hour weather. By default, it'll be an empty collection. And here this will be day weather, and by default it'll be an empty collection. And when we get the results here in our do catch after we invoke the service.weather for location, we can say self.currentWeather is result.currentWeather, self.dailyWeather is result.dailyWeather, and you guys probably know what's coming up next. For hourly weather, we'll do results.hourlyWeather. All right, so now that we've retained the models here, let me see why this is yelling at me. Well, so we got the daily forecast here, but we actually want to get the forecast out of the genericized model. And this will actually give us the collection directly. So in this case, it's hour weather. In this case, it's our day weather. So go ahead and do a command B to build your project. Make sure everything is kind of bueno, going good, compiling. And the next thing we want to do is think a little bit about how our UI here will look. In other words, what type of component do we need to start rendering out some of this information? What we want to do is we want to show the current forecast right up top here. It would be pretty helpful. And then perhaps similar to Apple's app, we want to have a horizontal scrollable section for the hourly weather. And then we want to have a maybe vertical section so that's scrollable for the daily weather. And what we'll be able to do later on is, in the spirit of making our app or having a pro subscription or app, making our app, drive some revenue as well. Later on, we can conditionally hide different sections and say like, hey, if this is a pro user, we want to show this. Otherwise, we don't want to show this. So what I'm alluding to using here is a collection view, which lets us conditionally dequeue different cells and sections in a pretty nice fashion. And we'll essentially set that up here, and we're going to leverage all of the models here into our view models that we haven't created yet or defined, and we'll configure our view with it. So we have these three models here, and what I'll do is I'll expose a computed property called public var weather fetched. And actually, we don't even need this if you think about it in the greater context, because our weather view controller, what we'll do here is we get this completion callback once we are kind of done fetching the weather. And essentially what I can do inside of here is we're going to say weak self in, so we don't retain self in a strong capacity. I can say weak self dot primary view dot configure. And we'll essentially call configure on this view, and that function doesn't exist yet, but we do want to do it on the main thread since we are going to essentially trigger this view to start updating UI. Let me create that public func configure function here. And essentially what configure is going to do is we kind of want to tell our view like, hey, we have data now, reload yourself. So maybe instead of even calling this configure, maybe we'll call this reload. And we'll want to set this up in a way where it can reload itself. All right, so before it can even reload itself, let's talk about building the collection view of this. So what we'll want to do is as follows. We'll want to define a collection view, and we're going to use a compositional layout since the type of layout we're describing is a little bespoke. It's a little custom. We want some vertical scrolling and horizontal and some fancy smanchy stuff going on. So a compositional layout gives us a whole lot more flexibility than a traditional flow layout. If you're not familiar or perhaps comfortable with this type of collection view layout, I've got a dedicated video, actually multiple videos on it, that I encourage you to go and check out. So we'll create this. We're going to create it with a frame as well as a layout. The frame will be 0 and layout will define momentarily. Let's return this collection view here. Don't forget, we're going to lay this out with some constraints. So just like any other view, we'll set this property to false. And we'll create the layout right up above. So this is going to be a UI collection view compositional layout. And the constructor that we want is the one that basically takes in a closure. Oh, that's not what we want. We want a section provider, if I'm not mistaken. This one here. And here we get the section index. The second argument is the environment. Well, I'll choose to ignore. And what I want to do is, based on the section that we are going to render here, we can choose to return a different type of a layout. So let's take a step back and talk about sections. The first section up here, we want kind of one big cell that shows the current weather, maybe an icon, the temperature. That's section 1, index 0, I should say. The second section is going to be the horizontal scrollable daily weather, right? So maybe, or hourly weather, I should say. So like what's going to happen, let's see, right now it's almost 5 p.m. What's going to happen at 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. and so on and so forth. From there, we're going to have the daily weather, which should be another section that's vertically scrollable. So these sections will essentially allow us to go and define the different types of layout constraints and barriers when it comes to these different indices. So let's actually create a separate function for this, and we'll do it down below. So let me create a function here, and I'll say private func layout for section, which is going to be an integer. And what we want to return is the ns collection layout section. And we'll basically do this in here. Now this poses a problem that, well, hey, this is a constant that we're creating. So what we'll probably want to do is as follows. Let me grab all of this. We'll make this a mutable, nullable collection view. And at the bottom of our initializer, we'll say create collection view. Now I realize that creating this collection view is a bit involved, so perhaps I'll split this up into a few videos, but here we'll be able to say self.collection view is our collection view like so. And in our closure here, we can say return self.layout for, and then pass in our section index just like that. Now, if we try to build, we're gonna get yelled at here because we need to return at minimum one section. So we'll do this in the following way. So right now we're getting an integer and we're just passing that in, which is kind of straightforward, but what's even better that we could go about doing is we can create an enum which will represent the various sections in our weather view. Now, what I'm going to choose to do is I am going to create some view models and models that we're going to use to model all this jazz. So in our view models, let's create a Swift file, and we're going to call this current weather section. And inside of here, we're going to have an enum called current weather section, super creative. And what I'll be able to do is we'll say the first one is current, the second section will be hourly, and this will be daily. So now that we have all of this jazz here, we can say that this is going to be case iterable, like so. And back in our view, we can say that the section that we want to return a layout for is going to be, let's change this to section index, is going to be current weather section, and we can say all cases, and then you can use the section index here. And finally, when we switch on section, this will be a little more type safe than using, you know, a random number 0, 1, and 2. This is a lot more legible and I think frankly much cleaner. So let's do it. So for our current weather section, we kind of just want one gigantic cell. So what we'll do is we're going to need to create an item, group, and section and return that. So our item is going to be a NS collection layout item. And this gets created with a layout size and a supplementary item if need be. Now, it's not really relevant to us for the supplementary item, but for the layout size, we are going to want this to be a fractional width here, and that will be 1.0, so 100% of the width. And the height dimension is also going to be fractional width. I'm going to call this maybe 75% of the width of the super view, which in this case will be our entire device. Now, once more, I'm going to stress that if you're not familiar with compositional layouts, they are a tad bit confusing, so bear with me here. The next thing we want is going to be a group, which will be a NS collection layout group, and we're going to stick with a vertical group. We're going to have a single item in here. So here we can say a sub item and count, or we can go with this approach where we pass in a array of items. So we'll just pass in that single item. Now the layout size, just like we did right up above, we're going to initialize with a width. This will be a fractional width of once more 1.0 and a fractional height of once more, or fractional width I should say, of 0.75. And I just realized myself that I made a slight mistake here. Here for the item, we actually want it to be 1.0 for both the width and height, since items get nested inside of groups. So that's how this is going to be put together. And finally, we can return a NS collection layout section. And this just gets created with the group we created right up above. So first and foremost, let me go and kind of line break all this jazz, because it's getting a little tough in terms of the readability department. And what I'll do is copy and paste this into both of the other cases just so we can build and run. And let's make sure we're able to successfully compile here. Now, when I run, we're actually going to crash. And the reason we're going to crash is because we have not registered anything to our collection view here, and we're not going to see any cells because we never set up its data source and added it as a subview. So let's make sure we do that. So here we'll say add subview collection view. We want to set up its data source, not delegate. And we also want to register 3 different kinds of cells. And the reason we want to register 3 different kinds of cells is we're going to have one for the current weather, one for hourly weather, and one for daily weather. Now it dawns on me that we have not created these views yet, but we can create them really quickly and just stub them out with some color so we can go and see something. So let me create a new folder in here, and I'll call this weather cells. And We're going to create a new Cocoa Touch class and subclass the UI collection view cell, and I'll call this current weather collection view cell. And inside of here, I'll override the initializer and simply set a color. So I'll say content view background color is perhaps red. Don't forget, you need to bring in this initializer as well, otherwise you will get yelled at and your project will not compile. I like to use a static cell identifier constant that we're going to use momentarily to set up these cells with our collection view to register them. In the meantime, let's create our other two cells. So here I'll say daily weather collection view cell, create that. And let's create one more, we'll add it. We're gonna say hourly weather collection view cell. You can go ahead on in and paste what we copied from the initial cell. We can even change the color in here for a little bit of variety in what we are going to see momentarily in our collection view. Make sure when you copy and paste that you're changing this identifier string, because if these are duplicative across your registration in the collection view, your app will indeed crash. So let's jump back into our current weather view. And this is where we can register our cell. So current weather collection view cell dot self, and the ID we're going to register it with is this same thing dot identifier. Disregard the error you see right up above. It's because we have not conformed to the data source yet. But let's go and add our other two cells. So here we'll have the hourly weather collection view cell. That's duplicated. Let me copy and paste that here. And finally, we'll have daily here. And before we build our project, let's add conformance in an extension for our UI collection view data source. Now, what does our data source want? It's going to want number of sections. We'll hard code 3 for the time being, but we will make this dynamic momentarily. It's going to want number of items in section. So what I will do here is randomly just return 1 so we can start seeing something. We're going to want cell for item, or rather item, I believe it's cell for, what is this function called? Collection view, cell for item at index path, that is correct. And in here, we basically just want to dequeue at least one cell and return it. So what I'll be able to do is I can say guard let cell is going to be collection view dot dequeue, a reusable cell with an identifier for the index path. Now I'm just going to hard code all this for the sake of time in this video, but we want the current weather collection view cell dot cell identifier. Obviously we're going to want to use all 3 of those cells that we created later on, but for now I want something to show up. If we're not able to get this cell and cast it, we are going to fatal error. Otherwise, we'll return the cell here. I know we just ran through a lot, but just to recap, we created this layout, which we've copy and pasted, need to adjust. We registered some cells, and we set up the basic data source, which has a lot of hard-coded jazz in it. So let's just give this a run and let's see if we see anything here. So I don't quite see anything here yet. So problem number 1, let's get rid of this orange background color. It's not helping our case, and let's see what's going on here. So we're saying create collection view, which creates it here. We've added it as a subview and we've assigned it. Now, one thing we have not done, which is blatantly obvious rereading this, is we have not actually given this constraints. We haven't laid it out. So let's do that. So we're going to say top anchor is going to be equal to the top anchor. And we've seen this elsewhere in the project so far. So we can simply just copy and paste what we did there essentially. So we're just going to do the left, right, and bottom. And we're basically just pinning the collection view to all sides. And now we're starting to see something. So we see we've got this red cell here. And it looks like it's just one cell. So let's see what is going on. So we're only dequeuing one item per section, but let's see what is going on. So in this case, I'll say if index path dot row is 0, do this. Otherwise, we're going to say if this is 1, do this. And we'll have an else case here, do this. Now, obviously, we're going to be getting rid of these, don't worry. But I do want to at least stub this out here to make sure that we are able to successfully see the 3 different types of cells that we did go ahead and create. So let's give this a built-in run, and we are only seeing this red cell. So let's see what gives. So this current weather cell here is red, alrighty. This next one here is purple. And I believe what the option here is, I used row, but what I was actually going for is if the section is 0, 1, and else, then use different cells. We're only going to have, in this case, 1 cell per section, and boom, we see our 3 cells. Obviously, this layout is totally screwed up, but for the sake of time, I believe it's more valuable if we split this video up, since there's quite a bit of layout stuff left to do before we start plumbing our data to view models and finally rendering all of it before we jump into the in-app purchase portion of this series. So thanks again for watching and sticking around throughout the whole video. Let me know in the comments if any of this got a little too complicated. Happy to answer any questions. Code is made available on GitHub. You can find a link in the description of all the videos in this series down below. Drop a like before clicking on over to the next video. Appreciate y'all watching, and I will see you in the next part.